is saying that the purpose of avatarhood is twofold. But in the previous two chapters earlier, he has said that it has got many purposes. The first purpose is to be an example to man for guidance, number one. Second is to leave a divine vibration in the earth atmosphere so that everybody will benefit. The third one, give a method of ascent into divine status. Then the next one is take forward evolution. Okay? That is Loka Sangrahanartham. Final, prepare the kingdom of God in the world. One step more. So this is the purpose. So now we read each sentence and see whether it's clear. The work for which the avatar descends has, like his birth, a double sense. Even the work has got a double sense, not a purpose, and a double form. It has an outward side of the divine force acting upon the external world in order to maintain there and to reshape the divine law by which the Godward effort of humanity is kept from decisive retrogression and instead decisively carried forward in spite of the rule of action and reaction, the rhythm of advance and relapse by which nature proceeds. We know very well that evolution is cyclical. It goes up and down, up and down. It also sometimes stagnates and then picks up again. So when it stagnates, then they're saying the avatar descends to set the motion again, the spiral movement again. So that's what he's saying very clearly. This is the first one. The prevent the Godward effort of humanity, which is evolution, okay, to go, prevent it from going down. So it encourages it to go up. That's the problem. Then there is an inward side, the work of the avatar. It has an inward side of the divine force of the Godward consciousness acting upon the soul of the individual and the soul of the race. This is the one which he has also spoken about earlier. So, first your work in the physical world itself. For instance, Sri Aurodolo's work in the physical world was very clear. Okay? To stop the advance of the Asuric forces. In fact, he very clearly mentions that in many, many letters also. If Hitler had succeeded, it would have been the evolution would have gone back about 500, 600 years. He says for a long time it would have gone. So that to prevent that was Sri Aurodolo's work. And he ensured that the Axis powers, Germany and Japan and Italy also to a certain extent, they were eliminated. Okay, so that's what work he did physically. But the inward work was he was helping all the sadhaks and even the physical world. He was helping not only us, but we know that he was helping everybody else also in the world. No? We know of two cases only which are recorded. One is that Silvio Crasciunas in Romania, and the other was this John Kelly during the Second World War. These are the two very clear instances of how he was helping all over, everywhere in the world. Not only the sadhaks in the ashram and sadhaks in India, there are so many centers all following his teachings. Even now there are so many all over the country. But all over the world he was doing that. So that was the inward side. Very clear. If you take Sri Aurodolo's case, very clear. Okay. Then Krishna also, the Kurukshetra war was the outer work. And the inner work was the helping everybody to go to a higher level. The dancing with the gopis, that's an inner work. Okay. The gopis represent the individual souls who are attracted by the divine flute player. So that's what it says. So I'm reading the sentence again. It has an inward side of the divine work of the Godward consciousness acting upon the soul of the individual and the soul of the race, collectively and individually, so that it may receive new forms of revelation of the divine in man and may be sustained renewed, and enriched by its power of upward self-unfolding. Now that also is interesting. He is mentioning very clearly new forms of revelation of the divine. Okay, so even its yoga is a new form of yoga. It's an integral yoga is a new form because the old ones were not suitable for modern times. You can't sit in meditation for 2 hours and yet go and do your job in the world. That's hardly possible. So, a new form had to be created. So, he's including that also. So that also sounds okay. Introduce new forms. Okay. The avatar does not descend merely for a great outward action, as the pragmatic sense in humanity is too often tempted to suppose. Action and event have no value in themselves, but only take their value from the force which they represent and the idea which they symbolize and which the force is there to serve. So that's the thing. The inward action. In fact, it reminds me also of Srimar saying, no one can write about my biography because the outward side is not at all. Nobody knows my inner level. Nobody has seen my inner life. So how can anybody write? The outward is the most unimportant. That's repeating here. So Tarika, I think, has a problem. So next somebody else can read. Yasmin, if you have the text, you can read. But if you don't have the text,
No, if
Sorry, I
no,
don't have
you
that.
can hear me, I will read. If you people can hear me, I will read.
yeah, we can hear you. We can
Okay.
hear you. Okay, go ahead.
The crisis in which the avatar appears, though apparent to the outward eye only as a crisis of events and great material changes, is always in its source and real meaning a crisis in the consciousness of humanity, when it has to undergo some grand modification and effect some new development. For this action of change, a divine force is needed. But the force varies always according to the power of consciousness which it embodies. Hence, the necessity of a divine consciousness manifesting in the mind and soul of humanity, where indeed the change is mainly intellectual and practical. The intervention of the avatar is not needed. There is a great uplifting of consciousness, a great manifestation of power in which men are for the time being exalted above their normal selves. And this surge of consciousness and power finds its wave crests in certain exceptional individuals, vibhutis, whose action leading the general action is sufficient for the change intended. The Reformation in Europe and the French Revolution were crises of this character. They were not great spiritual events, but intellectual and practical changes, one in religious, the other in social and political ideas, forms and motives, and the modification of the general consciousness brought about was a mental and dynamic, but not a spiritual modification. But when the crisis has a spiritual seed or intention, then a complete or a partial manifestation of the God consciousness in a human mind and soul comes as its originator or leader. That is the avatar.
So very clearly he has given the function of the avatar. And very interesting details he has given. We can discuss that in a brief manner. Okay. The crisis in which the avatar appears, though apparent to the outward eye only as a crisis of events, not the spiritual inner realities, and the great material changes, is always in its source and real meaning a crisis in the consciousness of humanity, which, when it has to undergo some grand modification and effect some new development. So, this crisis of events is very clear. In Cherno's case, it was the World War, the Second World War, which absolutely engulfed mankind. It never happened before in history. So it's a great change that had to come about, grand modification. The other one also, Sri Krishna's avatar, it is a Kurukshetra war. It's a huge affair. Okay, so that's when the crisis of events. But both had got the inner meaning. That was the more important thing. That's what it's mentioning. For this action of change, a divine force is needed. For smaller changes, it is not necessary. A crisis of events he has mentioned 2 times. One is the Reformation and the other is the French Revolution. Huge change. The French Revolution introduced the ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity. That made a huge difference in the Western world. Okay? Not necessarily in the Eastern world, but the Western world is a huge crisis. After all, they are also part of humanity and part of the collectivity of mankind. So, it's the crisis of events. Okay, crisis is the consciousness. The main thing is the crisis in the consciousness. In the 2 cases we mentioned in the World War and Kurukshetra, the crisis of the consciousness was not obvious to ordinary people. Nobody knew what Srivastava was doing. He was fighting the Asuras. And very interesting, he was fighting the Asuric movement even before the World War. And that is why the Asuric forces attacked him and broke his leg, so that his work was completely postponed for a certain time. And then the war came. So interesting, if you note very carefully how his leg broke 1 year before the World War started. If his leg had not broken, okay, then he would probably have avoided the war even. That is possible. Of course, that's difficult to say because Hitler had already gone to Czechoslovakia, Poland, and when he went into Czechoslovakia, the war started. The World War started because mankind couldn't take it anymore. So it's interesting how the series of events, Srivastava's breaking of the leg and the World War starting immediately afterwards. The Asuric enjoyment, now saying now that Srivastava is now non-operative for some time at least, now we can introduce the war again. Something like that. It's very interesting. So that was the inner side that Srivastava is talking about. But for these great changes, a divine force is needed. But the force varies always according to the power of consciousness which it embodies. Hence, the necessity of a divine consciousness manifesting in the mind and soul of humanity, where indeed the change is mainly intellectual and practical, not necessarily the soul. The intervention of the avatar is not needed. For a smaller work, vibhutis are enough. So, for instance, in the French Revolution and later on, there were some people who were very crucial in that movement. And Napoleon was certainly of course, he came after the French Revolution, but he was a vibhuti. This is power of consciousness which it embodies. Hence, the necessity of a divine consciousness manifesting in the mind and soul. When it is in the mind, it is a lesser work to be done, and the soul of humanity, much more important work to be done. Where indeed the change is mainly intellectual and practical, the intervention of the avatar is not needed. There is a great uplifting of consciousness, a great manifestation of power, in which men are, for the time being, exalted above the normal selves. And the surge of consciousness and power finds its wave crest in certain exceptional individuals. I finished the sentence. Vibhutis, there you are. The exceptional individuals are the vibhutis, whose action, leading the general action, is sufficient for the change intended. I also point out to you how there's an image here. It's like the sea which is surging upwards. It's suddenly the storm, the waves come up and then fall down again. And that's he's using the word surge and wave crests. So he's saying that this is how just like a storm, the water goes up and down. He's comparing that to the movements in the physical world also. in certain exceptional individual devotees. The Reformation in Europe, the Reformation is the Protestant movement that broke away from the Catholic religion. Because before that, the priests were very happy because the Bible was in Latin, okay, and everybody did not know Latin, so they were doing whatever they wanted. Okay, they were doing so many things which are wrong. Okay, we know that the sale of indulgences and all these things were there. And then the Protestant movement, Martin Luther in Germany, he protested against that. And then the Bible was translated into regional languages also. So that was the Protestant movement. It's important for Europe. And the French Revolution. The French Revolution actually came after the American Revolution. So they say that the French Revolution, the cause was the dissatisfaction in France, but the remote cause was the American Revolution. There are two causes. So that's very true. Where clashes of this character. So even the French Revolution, he is not saying, in fact, he is saying there is not a grand modification. The grand modification needs an avatar. But the minor ones, only the mind changes. For Europe, it was a huge thing, the French Revolution, because it introduced the ideas of equality, liberty, fraternity, which of course is only a mental idea, which Chandra discussed very clearly in the essays also, that the real equality and fraternity can come only when the human being rises to the self. Then the fraternity and the equality become spiritual. But before that, it is mental and it can easily break down. So that's it. He explains that. So, but crises of this character. They were not great spiritual events. There you are, very clear. Not great spiritual events, but intellectual and practical changes. One in religious, the other in social and political ideas, forms and motives. And the modification of the general consciousness brought about was a mental and dynamic, but not a spiritual modification. However great an event it is in history, still it is not a spiritual change. But when the crisis has a spiritual seed or intention, then a complete or a partial manifestation of the God consciousness in a human mind and soul comes as its originator or leader. That is the avatar. Now, Sri is very clearly mentioning also a partial manifestation. And we know that he speaks of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, okay, as the initiator of the Vaishnava movement of devotion in Bengal. And later on it spread all over. But so it's a partial manifestation. It required that the movement of bhakti came about with that Vaishnavism. Okay, so that also was an event, spiritual event, not a political event. So we have 7 minutes more. We can read one more para.
Ranganath,
Yeah. Yes.
I'd like to add 2-3 things which I feel whether it's correct or not. Like Krishna, the Kurukshetra war, the Bhagavad Gita, is also gave birth to the Bhakti movement, the complete surrender.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if you see the Bhagavad Puran, which is also the life history of, is supposed to be the life of Krishna,
Yes.
it speaks so much, and the Gopi movement. So the complete surrender of human beings.
Yes.
That is one, the inner consciousness movement.
Yes, yes.
And maybe Sherwin is brought in the equality.
Yeah.
The end of all aristocracy, the Samta movement, which we can say.
Yeah.
Which he tells that though French Revolution brought it politically, it didn't bring it spiritually. But Sherwin sought, that real equality. Like in ashram, where the equality we see in ashram, I don't think is there anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like absolutely no, what is that called? Levels that this one is so and so. Everywhere we see that equality in the ashram, at least in sense and quite a lot in action also.
Yes.
So probably he brought in that equality. I just wanted, some feelings which I had, I wanted to share.
Yes, yes, yes. So Can we read the next one? Uh, Shilpa, you have not read for a long time. Would you like to read?
Yes, Ranganath, I will read.
Okay, go ahead. The outward action of the avatar.
Yes. The outward action of the avatar is described in the Gita as the restoration of the dharma. When from age to age the dharma fades, languishes, loses forces, and its opposite arises strong and oppressive, then the avatar comes and raises it again to power. And as these things and idea are always represented by things in action and by human beings who obey their impulsion, his mission is in its most human and outward terms to relieve the seekers of the dharma who are oppressed by the reign of the reactionary darkness, and to destroy the wrongdoers who seek to maintain the denial of the dharma. But the language used can easily be given a poor and insufficient connotation which would deprive avatarhood of all its spiritual depth of meaning. Dharma is a word which has an ethical and practical, a natural and philosophical, and a religious and spiritual significance, and it may be used in any of these senses, exclusive of the others, in a purely ethical, a purely philosophical, or a purely religious sense. Ethically, it means the law of righteousness, the moral rule of conduct, or in a still more outward and practical significance, social and political justice, or even simply the observation of the social law. If used in this sense, we shall have to understand that when unrighteousness, injustice, and oppression prevail, the avatar descends to deliver the good and destroy the wicked, to break down injustice and oppression and restore the ethical balance of mankind.
Yeah, very interesting. His definition of dharma here is excellent. Very often, the idea of dharma, the concept of dharma is not properly understood. There are many people who think dharma is duty, okay, dharma is religion. It is not. It's the maintenance of the law at every level. That is what Sri is explaining beautifully here. Okay. So really very satisfactory, this definition of dharma. We can always use this one. Now, we read quickly, go through. The outward action of the avatar is described in the Gita as the restoration of the dharma. So this is in chapter 4, verse 7 and 8. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyudhanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamya. I let myself come into manifestation. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha duskritam. Dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. I take birth again and again for the establishment of the dharma. So that's why Srimad is discussing dharma here. The outward action of the avatar is described in the Gita as the restoration of the dharma. Dharma sansthapanarthaya. When from age to age the dharma fades, languishes, loses force, and its opposite arises, strong and oppressive, then the avatar comes and raises it again to power. Now this is very interesting because we know that the evolution goes spirally, up and down, up and down. So when it goes down, sometimes it goes too far down, then the avatar has to take birth. Okay, so otherwise it picks up automatically by its own force, it goes on. But sometimes it goes down too low, like in the Germany in the after the First World War, it really went to unbelievable depths of depravity and ugliness. Tremendous. So then the avatar had to come. So that's the first thing. Then the avatar comes and raises it again to power. And as then things in idea are always represented by things in action and by human beings who obey their impulsion, his mission is, in its most human and outward terms, to relieve the seekers of dharma. Okay? Pavitranaya, Paritranaya sadhuna. Paritranaya, protection. Protection of the sadhus. So, relieve the seekers of the dharma who are oppressed by the reign of the reactionary darkness and to destroy the wrongdoers who seek to maintain the denial of the dharma. It's very interesting what's happening in India now. In a sense, it is certainly the same thing being repeated. On the one hand, we have the establishment of the Ram temple, which is from every point of view, it's a very important event, not only for India but for the world, because we are going back to our core values, Indian values of dharma. Okay, so it's a very important thing. But look at the opposition. Such nonsense they talk. It's unbelievable. Someone, they even go to the extent saying, who is Rama? He's only an idea. So, absolute, total ignorance. Then, but the language and the denial, so that which are the seekers of the dharma, it protects the seekers of dharma who are opposed to the reign of the reactionary darkness and to destroy the wrongdoers who seek to maintain the denial of the dharma. But the language used can easily be given a poor and insufficient connotation, which would deprive avatarhood of all its spiritual depth of meaning. Now, there he is explaining dharma. Dharma is a word which has an ethical, practical, natural, philosophical, religious and spiritual significance. Starting from the lowest level of morality, even practically, a natural and philosophical, religious, spiritual significance. There is a gradation. So dharma is applicable at all the levels, even at the physical level, then at the mental level, philosophical level, then finally the religious level and spiritual level. So dharma is the root is dhri. Dhri to hold. Hold what? These standards, the highest standard at that level of consciousness. That is the dharma. Okay. So it applies all over. It's not only religion. So the word which has an ethical, very clearly, ethical, practical, natural, philosophical, religious and spiritual significance. And it may be used in any of these senses, exclusive of the others, in a purely ethical, a purely philosophical, or a purely religious sense. That's exactly why when Ram is establishing the dharma, it's in a moral sense, not necessarily a higher. Okay. He himself may have been at a higher level of consciousness, but the standard he was establishing was a moral one. Ethically, it means a law of righteousness, the moral law of conduct, or in a still more outward and practical significance, social and political justice. It can be even political, okay? Or even simply the observation of the social law. In the standards of conduct, the social law is the second. It's not even the second, third and fourth. It is the second. So that also is dharma. If used in this sense, we shall have to understand that when unrighteousness, injustice and oppression prevail, the avatar descends to deliver the good and destroy the wicked, to break down injustice and oppression and restore the ethical balance of mankind. Yesterday, I sent a video to most of you about Anand Ranganath. Okay? And he says exactly this, that the oppression that the Hinduism had to go through for thousands of years after the Mughal reign, now it is reversed. That injustice that was done, so there is also speaking of unrighteousness and injustice. So that which has been suffered for 500 years has now been reversed. So that's the importance of the thing. Okay, we have gone 4 minutes beyond our time. We'll stop here today, and next time we can start from thus the popular and mythical account. Okay.
Thank you, Ranganath. Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir, everybody.
Thank you, Ranganath. Thank you.
Thus, 106.